rising cost of living in Nigeria continues to impact citizens from all walks of life.
The citizens of Gujarat witnessed a mega roadshow here in the city of Ahmedabad.
China is South Africa's largest trading partner for 134 years straight.
A domestic aircraft carrying 72 people on board crashed in Pokhara city in central Nepal.
165 injured have been moved, 61 people are confirmed dead, and rescue operations continue around me.
After receiving an entire season's rainfall in a span of 48 hours, Chennai city has literally been brought to its knees.
South Africa, for WION, World is One.
Vielleicht nur als Imposant.
Hi everyone, welcome to WION Live broadcast from New York City. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani. First, a look at this hour's headlines and then straight into our first story. The Kremlin says NATO and some European countries are provoking Ukraine to continue what it called a senseless war with Russia, slams Western countries for allowing Ukraine to use weapons against targets inside Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaches Czech capital Prague for the NATO foreign ministers meeting. Situation in Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova are all on the table. Ukraine's defense intelligence claims its special unit Group 13 destroyed 2 Russian amphibious assault boats in Crimea overnight. Meanwhile, China says its 2-day drills in Taiwan last week met intended goals, but it is prepared for further action if provoked. Pharmacists in France go on strike, their first in 10 years. It raises concerns on drug shortages, pharmacy closures, and online sale of medicines. And the French Open bans fans from drinking alcohol in the stands in a bid to end unruly behavior. The decision comes after Belgian David Goffin says that he was spat on by a spectator during his first round match in Paris. Recent Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia's nuclear early warning systems have raised significant concern in Washington. Our next report tells you how the Biden administration is worried that these attacks could dangerously unsettle Moscow, especially as the debate intensifies over whether to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-supplied weapons in cross-border assaults.
Ukrainian soldiers are fighting hard to check the advance of the Russian troops, who are backed by Russia's ferocious firepower. Kyiv's response has been daring drone strikes. Ukrainian drones hit early warning radar stations deep inside Russia, targeting systems that monitor not only conventional air threats but also potential nuclear launches. But these strikes could alter the strategic stability between the US and Russia. These early warning radar systems are designed to detect and track intercontinental ballistic missiles and determine if Russia is under nuclear attack. Analysts point out that the Krasnodar's radar can track missiles and drones close to Ukraine. The radar station near Orsk is primarily focused on the West Asia and China. The US has expressed its concern to Ukraine about these strikes, and there is also fear of how Russia might choose to retaliate. Ukraine says its attacks are aimed at reducing Russia's capability to track Ukrainian military movements in southern Ukraine, an argument that is finding little backing in Washington. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky continues to press that the Russian onslaught should be stopped.
Russia is using more than 3,000 guided aerial bombs per month against our people. We believe the number will go up to 3,500 next month. Thousands of bombs are falling on people.
The long-range Ukrainian strikes deep inside Russia come amid a chorus of Western nations, including Poland, the UK, Canada, France and Sweden, advocating for Kyiv to use Western weapons as it sees fit. These countries are pushing to give more freedom to Ukraine in its military operations against Russia. The Kremlin is accusing NATO of provoking Ukraine to prolong the conflict. The accusations coincide with the NATO foreign ministers meeting in Prague to discuss lifting restrictions on Kyiv's use of Western weapons for strikes inside Russia. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
We are now being joined by retired Colonel David DeRoche. He's also a professor of Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at National Defense University. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on WION this morning. The United States seems to be worried that strikes on Russian early warning system could alter the strategic stability between Moscow and Washington. Why is that?
Good question. So when you look at nuclear deterrence, in order to have stability in a realm where both countries have substantial nuclear forces, you really have to have visibility on what each country is doing. So if Russia's nuclear detection radars are blinded, then they have to resort to other less accurate methods. And the fear is that they will mistake innocent activity for some sort of nuclear activity and escalate. But it's worth noting that these radars are focusing south, where the United States doesn't have any fixed nuclear launch facilities. They were originally planned in the 60s when we had a strategic air command base in Saudi Arabia. We had nuclear missiles in Turkey. The radars under question here, at least from an American perspective, are aimed at an area that we don't have fixed launchers. And then the second thing is that there was a regime whereby the United States would inspect Russian positions and the Russians would inspect American positions that the Russians walked away from. So we could perhaps reestablish that on-site inspection as a means of mitigating the damage from weapons that the Russians have been using in the war in Ukraine.
And Colonel, as you well know, there is this debate about how Ukraine should utilize the weapons that it receives from the West in its fight against Russia. What happens if Ukraine is given the green light to use Western weapons inside Russian territory? And could there be any repercussions?
Good question. So I think based on past practice, the answer, what would happen, would be not much. When Russia initially invaded Ukraine and sought to annex, in what is quite frankly a colonial action, sought to annex about 25% of Ukraine. Russia initially accompanied that with the threat of nuclear escalation. And at every step of the way and periodically, Russia has been threatening this. This is clearly more of a psychological method aimed at undermining Western support for Ukraine's sovereignty. But when you start, and it's also worth noting that the Ukrainians launched a long-range strike against Engels Air Base, which was Russia's premier long-range nuclear launch facility, but it had also been used to launch missiles against Ukraine. So this has been going on for some time. There have been attacks against their deterrence. The Ukrainian position is that, look, Russia is massing forces on our border and is firing into Ukraine from Russia, and we're prevented from responding to that. So they're using strategic depth as a means of conducting tactical operations. If the restrictions were lifted, and I think they probably should be, you could mitigate this by, for example, saying, okay, we can only attack within the range of these Russian glide bombs, say 200 miles within Ukraine. I'm just throwing out random numbers, but you could say, look, this is the danger area, and push, establish a degree of danger for Russian forces operating in Ukraine. But these long-range radars, which are being used to guide glide bombing launched aircraft, which Ukraine has no means of countering at the moment, this is a threat here. I think that if we were to engage the strategic concerns in a meaningful manner, things like perhaps temporarily allowing Russian inspectors at U.S. nuclear facilities, we could mitigate this, assuming the Russian threat and the Russian concerns are raised in good faith. I think it's an open question as to whether they are making a good faith argument or just trying to scare people in the West.
Yeah, such valid points. Colonel, thank you so much for joining us. David B. DeRoche from Washington, D.C. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thanks, Susan.
All right, we've got some breaking news coming in for you from Israel. There is a big political development in the country as we speak. Benny Gantz's National Unity Party has now submitted a bill to dissolve the Knesset. The move by Israeli War Cabinet Minister is seen as an attempt to topple the government led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Earlier this month, Gantz threatened to leave Netanyahu's coalition if the premier does not declare a plan for the day after Hamas in Gaza. This is what Gantz had said on May 18th.
כדי שנוכל להילחם כתף אל כתף על קבינט המלחמה לגבש ולאשר עד 8 ביוני תוכנית פעולה שתוביל למימוש 6 יעדים אסטרטגיים בעלי חשיבות לאומית. להשיב הביתה את חטופינו, למוטט את שלטון החמאס ולפרז את רצועת עזה ולהבטיח שליטה ביטחונית ישראלית.
In April, Gantz also said that Israel should go to the polls in September, marking the first time that the left-wing politician called for early elections since joining the wartime government in the aftermath of Hamas's gruesome October 7th attack against Israel. Clearly, troubles are mounting for Benjamin Netanyahu at this point. And Netanyahu leads the right-wing bloc of parties known in Israel as the National Camp. It had won 64 of the 120 seats in the elections for the Knesset. The majority had been described as the most right-wing government in Israel's history. All right. Well, we're going to be keeping a close eye on this important and developing story and, of course, bring you all the latest as we learn more as well. For now, let's move on. North Korea has fired a barrage of missiles towards its waters in the eastern coast. This is according to Seoul. Pyongyang fired 10 short-range ballistic missiles towards the Sea of Japan. This comes days after a satellite rocket launched by Pyongyang ended in failure. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said that the missiles apparently landed outside of Japan's exclusive economic zone. The suspected missiles were fired from the Sunan area near its capital, Pyongyang, at 6:14 a.m. local time on Thursday. there were no immediate reports of damages. Meanwhile, Japan's Coast Guard has issued a maritime safety advisory over the North Korean launch and has urged ships to exercise caution if they find any fallen objects. The latest launch of missiles comes one day after North Korea flew hundreds of trash-carrying balloons towards the south in retaliation against South Korean activists flying anti-North Korean propaganda leaflets across the border. Tensions on the Korean peninsula have increased in recent months as the pace of both North Korea's weapons testing and South Korea's combined military exercises with the US and Japan have increased in a cycle of tit-for-tat as well. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is considering tapping billionaire Elon Musk as a policy advisor if he reclaims the White House in November. This, according to a Wall Street Journal report. According to the Wall Street Journal, although Trump has not finalized the specifics, the two have been in discussion over how Musk may provide formal input on matters like the border, the economy, and stopping voter fraud. Initial icy relations have been thawing recently between the social media platform X owner and the former president. Donald Trump was once banned from the social media site, not under Elon Musk, however. The report says that Musk is now in direct phone contact with Trump and that the pair talk several times a month. The Wall Street Journal reported that after Trump scored victories on Super Tuesday and became the presumptive Republican nominee, Musk had a meeting with the former president at Mar-a-Lago. The Wall Street Journal also says that Musk informed Trump about his ongoing influence campaign, which is aimed at convincing powerful U.S. business leaders not to support Democrat presidential nominee and current president Joe Biden. Musk has publicly opposed Biden and previously stated he would not provide money to any candidate. All right, now this news from New York City. Hollywood star Robert De Niro has lashed out at former U.S. President Donald Trump once again. The Oscar-winning actor called Donald Trump a monster this time, just hours after he stood outside the New York City courtroom where Donald Trump's hush money trial was taking place. De Niro accused Trump of being bent on destroying American democracy. He even called the Republican presidential candidate a clown and a dictator. De Niro even blamed Trump for inciting violence and destruction on January 6, 2021 at the U.S. Capitol. But De Niro's remarks were criticized harshly by Trump supporters, leading to an embarrassing face-off between the actor and the crowd, and it did not stop there. Later, the former president himself took to social media to take a jibe at veteran star Robert De Niro. He said, and this is a quote, "I never knew how small, both mentally and physically, wacko former actor Robert De Niro was. He suffers from an incurable case of Trump derangement syndrome. Robert, whose movies, artistry, and brand have gone way down in value since he entered the political arena at the request of crooked Joe Biden." Robert De Niro is, of course, a Democrat. He recently voiced an ad for Democrat President Joe Biden. According to him, he chose to lend his skills to a Biden-Harris campaign commercial because, quote, "it shows the violence of Trump." All right, the former head of the Dutch spy agency, dubbed as the Netherlands' smiling killer, Dick Schoof, has been proposed as the new prime minister of the Netherlands after nearly 6 months of debate within the coalition of 4 right-wing parties. Schoof has been nominated to succeed outgoing Premier Mark Rutte. The 67-year-old is currently the top official in the Justice Ministry. He's been labeled the smiling killer by fellow civil servants for his ruthlessness.
For me, this is a very intense moment. I never would have expected to be asked To standing here is an honor, and very special. And I'm well aware that the Prime Minister of the Netherlands is an intense job, but honorable.
We're taking. Despite having no previous experience in a parliament or government, Shoof's extensive background in public service and his commitment to the rule of law makes him a compelling candidate for the role. His appointment comes after election winner Geert Wilders, the leader of far-right Party for Freedom, formed a coalition with 3 other conservative parties. Geert Wilders ruled himself out of the top job, allowing the coalition to nominate Schoof. The smiling killer's career in public service began at the Association of Netherlands Municipalities, followed by a role at the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Science back in 1988. By 1996, he was appointed Deputy Secretary General at the Ministry of Justice and Security. Schoof has held several high-profile positions, including Chief Director at the Immigration and Neutralization Service from 1999 to 2003, where he played a significant role in reforming immigration legislation. From 2010 to 2013, he served as Director General of Police. And in 2019, Schoof was appointed as the Secretary General at the Ministry of Justice and Security, tasked with addressing scandals within the ministry. All right, moving on, let's turn our focus to Egypt, where Egypt is raising the price of subsidized bread, that is, for the first time in over 30 years. This comes as the government grapples with a growing budget strain caused by the rising cost of wheat, a key ingredient